What's up guys, today I'm going to be going over the Lake of Shadows speedrun world record, and more than likely probably giving way more detail than anyone would ever need, but it's going to be a pretty interesting video with a lot of really cool things. And there's going to be 3 different parts of this video. The first part will be going over the journey of the speedrun to get to the point it is, which will briefly cover everything up to the 2:16 time. Then we'll quickly be going over the strategy that got us to 2:07, then finally breaking down the current one in a lot more detail. Then after that, I'll be talking about the time loss and potential best time this strategy will allow, and the things that are still wrong with it and could be fixed. Then the last part will be some random things I found along the way that weren't useful at all, but are still very interesting and just how broken this trick is. Quick thing I want to throw in real quick that I initially forgot while recording this commentary is the 2 most commonly asked questions is why does the timer start when it did? That is because the timer doesn't start until the speedrun begins. If you want more information to actually understand the rules, you can go to speedrun.com and look at the rules, but that is why the timer starts when it does. Then the second most common question was, well, you could do this to kill the boss quicker, which means faster time, and that just isn't true. The strike can only end so quickly, and the boss is dead well before that point, so killing the boss quicker is pretty much just a waste of energy because the strikes will still end at the same time no matter what. Anyways, let's go ahead and begin. So let's go ahead and begin with the progression of the world record. So pretty much when this strike first came out, it wasn't available on PC and Xbox until Forsaken, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. But once that came over to most of the players that were playing on PC, the record quickly fell to in the 2:30s, which was about as fast as you could do it while playing in bounds. And the minor improvements along the way were mostly keeping your sparrow until night. One player would do that. One person would kill the captain for that player. Then the third player would pretty much just do nothing for the most part. And eventually they would get pulled to the boss, and that would be in the 2:30s. And that was more or less the fastest way you could do it in bounds. And the record didn't really change for a long time. It was pretty much the same strat forever. But then the out of bounds got found and started being used in the speedrun, which pretty much allowed the 2 players that were more or less not doing anything in the speedrun to actually have a purpose now. And that purpose would be one person would go out of bounds and go to this spot I'm showing on screen right now and die in that spot, which would pre-activate the boss CP, which means the player playing forward in bounds the second they killed the wizard and then went to this CP right here, the third player could already be dead and res right into the boss room. And that's a pretty much 12-ish seconds of the player running between that wizard CP into the boss room, and that resulted in roughly like a 2:16. And that is pretty much where the record was before I started doing runs about 3 weeks ago. And that's when I started testing a few things that led to the 2:07 that we did. The main idea I had going into finding stuff for that run was that the 2 extra players still weren't doing that much. They both had a lot of downtime of just sitting around and doing nothing. For example, the player going out bounds killed himself at the boss CP area, and then pretty much just waited a good 25 seconds of just doing nothing. Then the player that died, that way their res would be on timer, pretty much also wasn't doing anything either. So more or less it was still just one person doing the solo, but cutting that time between the wizard CP and boss. So I was thinking surely there is something else these players could be doing in that time to speed it up in some way. So the first thing I tested was the fact that the player going out bounds did not have to die on the boss CP area. They only had to touch it, which then means they could go and do something else. Then it just became a race to figure out what that player could be doing to speed up the speedrun. And that was finding that CP right after wizard that I spoke about that the inbound player usually was hitting, and hitting that from out of the map. That way the second the wizard died, the third player could then res, which now saved roughly 6 or 7 seconds over the 2:16 strat. Then if you cleaned up the strat overall, that resulted in roughly a 2:06, 2:07. And that is where we got our 2:07. And I think with that strategy, you could easily get a 2:06, which another team did. And I think potentially you could maybe get a 2:05. The limiting factor of that strat is the person's res timer. Pretty much, like I said, I don't want to get into too much detail about this strat because I want to talk a lot more about the current strat. It's pretty much a balance beam of having the player die right away so their res would be ready when it needed to be, or have them kill the captain for the inbounds player, which would help them be sped up, but that person's res timer would be even closer. So it's kind of like a balancing act of what is actually faster. and that resulted in, like I said, a 206, maybe a 205, and that was the limiting factor of that strategy. So after we did our 207, which we did in like 4-ish hours, we planned on doing more runs when it was the ordeal anyway, so we didn't really grind down the strat to what we thought it could be, because of the fact that we were playing on a version of the strike that was in theory slower than the ordeal. So we saw no reason to actually grind it down. And there was a week between when it was the Nightfall card version and the ordeal. I started thinking that it was so close to a sub 2 being a 205 potentially, and just thinking about, can I find that extra 5 or 6 seconds to get it below 2 minutes, which is like a huge minute barrier. And that pretty much was what was driving me going into the ordeal week and led me to going back into the strike and testing a lot more stuff. I was just trying to figure out how to make it sub 2, and that was the overall goal. So up until that point, all the different strategies I tried were pretty much revolving around the same concept, which was that the third player will res into the boss room after the inbound player kills the wizard. So pretty much everything I was trying revolved around one person dying and rezzing, which meant we pretty much only had 2 players actually doing the strike, which was greatly limiting what we could do. But that was kind of like the piece of information stuck in my head that I thought was a must for the fastest strategy. But then this week between the downtime of not having it as a Nightfall, I started thinking maybe that is limiting what the strategy could actually be. And what if instead of someone rezzing to the boss room, let's just try to get to the boss room as fast as physically possible, then figure out the rest from there. So the overall idea was to get one player to the boss room as fast as physically possible and see what that would result in terms of time. There's going to be 2 huge things that allow me to get to the boss room as fast as possible. The first one is one person joining as we enter the first load zone of the strike with the 3 blights. And what that does is while they're loading, it delays them spawning in, which also delays the door by the arc guy that you usually have to wait, kill the arc guy, then it pops up and you can destroy it. But if you delay when that area actually loads because someone is joining the fire team, none of that stuff is spawned in, which means you can drive right through. So that's going to be the first big thing that will allow me to get to the boss room very quickly, is just driving right through that area, not killing any of the blights, and already being in the strike before the blights even load in. And that saved roughly 12-ish seconds. So that was pretty much the first piece of information I knew before even starting testing that would potentially make the strategy work. And the second one was you could go out of bounds and drop through this window right here into the wizard area. And what you could do is walk backwards to where the bridge is, and you can actually pre-spawn the wizard before killing the captain or knight or doing anything. So you can actually do the strike out of order and kill the wizard before doing anything else. So that meant I could drive through the outside section without being delayed by the blights, then go straight to the wizard, have the wizard pre-spawn, that way it's already there, which means I can then progress to the boss and be at the boss room in pretty much a minute and 20-ish seconds. So just looking at how fast I could get to the boss room, this led to roughly a 156 pace run, but now we had to figure out how we're going to do all of the other strike at the same time. That way when I get to the boss room, it's actually ready for me, because if you try to enter the boss room before everything else in the strike is done, it's still a kill zone and you die instantly. So now I had a working strategy that potentially was sub 2. I just had to figure out how to make it work and how we're going to do all the other things in the strike fast enough. That way it is done and ready when I get to the room. So now enters the part of all the issues along the way, trying to make the strategy actually work, and roadblock after roadblock. So at this point, the overall strategy is 2 people drive forward while 1 person's loading in, which allows them to go through the door before it even spawns in. 1 person drops to the wizard and goes towards the wizard. 1 person drops at the same spot and goes backwards towards the bridge to spawn the wizard for that first player. And that first person goes to the boss and enters the boss room. And the third player that is joining, when he lands, he spawns in at the first blight. He kills the 3 blights, kills the arc guy, goes in, kills the captain, then spawns in the knight and kills the knight. And hopefully, in theory, by the time he kills the knight, I'm already at the boss room and we're good to go. And it's going to be roughly a 156 pace. So the first major issue is that the 2 players going forward into the strike before it's even loaded is that the player going to the wizard gets there way quicker than the person going backwards to spawn the wizard. And not only that, the second the player that goes backwards to the spot that spawns the wizard, it takes another 4 seconds for the wizard to actually spawn in. So me going forward to the wizard, I would be waiting there for probably a good 10 seconds before the wizard was actually even there. So that pretty much just instantly added 10 seconds to the run, making it a 206. And honestly, that pretty much is slower than the previous strategy, so it's out the window at this point. So I had to figure out a way to spawn in the wizard much quicker, or else this strategy was pretty much scrapped instantly. And just like you could spawn in the boss CP out of bounds, I thought, why can't you do the same for the wizard CP? So I already knew where the wizard CP was hit from inbounds, so all I had to do was go out of bounds and pretty much look at the same spot and pretty much just touch all the spots around it. And surely enough, right here, which is the hallway inbounds where we were hitting it, is also the same spot out of bounds, and it works. And that is almost 6 full seconds quicker to hit the spot from here than it was to go inbounds and backwards to the bridge area. So this is making it look a lot more realistic. When I drop into the wizard spot and go to the wizard should be there roughly 2 seconds after I get there, which makes it roughly a 158 pace run. So now the run is actually working, still sub 2, and seems to be good. But now, looking at it further, I also figure out that Alex, who is the third person joining, he is not even close to killing the knight in time before I get to the boss room on perfect pace. In a perfect pace, I would get to the boss room, and the knight still wouldn't be dead for roughly like another 4-ish seconds, which meant, obviously, if I tried to go into the room, I would die. So once again, it's not working. Things are not lining up. So now at this point, I'm pretty much thinking about how do I make Alex's job quicker. And I didn't think anything about the route he's doing himself could be quicker, because it was pretty much the same thing I was doing in solo, and there really isn't much time save anywhere. And he needed to find roughly 4 seconds, which I was like, there's just no way you're picking up 4 seconds on that route. So just like we spawned the wizard from out of bounds, I was thinking maybe you could pre-spawn in the knight from out of bounds also. And surely enough, I found another spot that could pre-spawn the knight, which meant the second Alex got on the bridge, it would already be there for him, which resulted in him killing the knight roughly 4-ish seconds quicker, which would make it actually possible. And the knight would be dead when I got to the boss room, which once again made the strategy work, and it was a 158 pace. So just recapping where the strategy is at this point, the first 2 players are going through the door that spawns in, going straight to out of bounds. One person goes to the wizard and drops inbounds to the wizard, waits for it to spawn, then goes to the boss room. One person goes out of bounds to the wizard spot and spawns in the wizard from out of bounds, then quickly goes to this knight spawn area. That way, the second Alex, which is the third player, gets to that spot, the knight is already there and can shoot it right away. And this strategy in theory worked, and it was a 158 pace if everything was perfect. But once again, another major issue came up. When I was testing something completely different, I kind of stumbled into this and realized it. And a lot of this testing I was doing by myself and not with them, because I was just testing random ideas. So this is something I would have found pretty early on testing with 3 people. But just the way I was testing it by myself and the order I had to do things, it wasn't something that I could really stumble into on purpose. And that was the fact that when you kill the arc guy, the Centurion outside, that changes the CP of the strike from destroy the blights to find the leader. And that is pretty much the only CP in the entire strike that changes. And that CP is what spawns in everything in the strike, which is a big deal because of the fact that in the strategy, Ember was going out of bounds and spawning in the wizard for me. And I was killing the wizard, which works in theory. But at the point Ember was trying to spawn in the wizard, the arc guy was yet to be killed, which meant the find the leader CP didn't pop up, which is what allows the strike to actually begin. So when Ember would actually really get there in a really good pace, it wouldn't even spawn in the wizard, which once again meant it was delayed, which means I would be delayed, which directly means the time goes up. So now the issue is we gotta kill that arc guy like 4 seconds quicker somehow, because we can't physically do our jobs until he's dead. So I already talked about a few minutes ago that in Alex's route, there pretty much is no time save anywhere. So how is he going to kill the arc guy 4 seconds quicker? It seems pretty much impossible, right? But the only way you can do it is by killing one of the blights for him, which introduces multiple new problems to solve. One, how do we kill a blight for him while still driving through the door and there's not even the blights there when we pass them? Like, how do we do that? Then number 2, which blight do we destroy for him? And that one was a little bit easier to solve, because when you think about it, the arc guy spawns in after all 3 blights are destroyed. So if you think about it, from when Alex spawns in by the first blight, which one of the 3 blights takes him the longest to destroy? Well, it's obviously the third one, because that is the furthest one away from him. So we destroy the 3rd blight for him. That means the arc guy starts spawning in the second he kills the second one, which is like roughly a 5 or 6 second time save, which is more than enough. But now we have to figure out, how are we killing the 3rd blight for him? And my first idea that I thought was going to be the final idea was to put Anarchy on the ground. And you can only do one, because if you do two, it does not hit the blight. So you have to put one on the ground. And remember, when we put the Anarchy on the ground, we can't even see the blight, so we have to memorize where it's at. And you put one on the ground, then you drive forward through the wall, and then when Alex spawns, the blight spawns in. And it took roughly like 6 or 7 seconds for the Anarchy to destroy the blight. And at that point, you would have to blindly swap back to Black Talon or whatever sword you needed, and pretty much just pray that it destroy the blight and continue with your run. Then on top of that, I also figured out I could use Mountaintop with sticky grenades, which made the blight a little bit faster, making it roughly 5 or 6 seconds. But still, this introduced a lot of new issues I had to solve. I had to pretty much blindly kill the blight, then swap back to Black Talon right when it died without even knowing if it died or not. And one huge thing to note is that I had to stay in the spawn load zone, which meant I couldn't drive through the hallway into the actual strike until the blight died, because if you change load zones, your Anarchy despawns. So I could only go so far, pop open my inventory, and swap when I thought it died, which obviously delayed my route by a few seconds, but this was something that had to be done. If the third blight wasn't being destroyed for Alex, we couldn't do the 158 pace anyways, so eating that like 2 or 3 seconds of time loss was something that needed to be done. The few positives of this strategy were that it gave Alex more time to kill his knight, because of the fact that he pretty much gained 5 seconds of time from the arc guy. So that meant he could also be killing the knight roughly 5 seconds quicker, which made Alex's job way more realistic to actually do and be ready for when I got to the boss room. And now that the knight guy was no longer an issue, like it was before where we had Ember spawning in the knight from out of bounds, that way it would be quicker. Instead, now what Ember can do is drop back in bounds to the knight, which you can do through this part right here. It's a random little hole missing in the top corner of the map. And then he could just sword the knight for Alex, which means Alex didn't have to like try to xenophage or snipe it or something like that, which made Alex's job even easier and made it more realistic. So overall at this point, the strategy seemed to be at like a 201 pace, and it seemed to be working pretty much as expected. So like I said, I thought at this point I had a pretty good working strategy. It definitely wasn't sub 2 anymore, but at that point I pretty much gave up on sub 2 and was just trying to make the strategy work and be the overall fastest way to do the strike. But then another issue came up, and this one wasn't as big of a deal, but caused a lot of lingering issues throughout the actual week. And that was when Ember passed through the hallway going into the first part of the strike, where the captain and all that stuff is. The little wall that you usually have to break pops up roughly a second or two after the first person passes it, which meant I was sitting in my inventory waiting to swap back to Black Talon, which meant when I got out of my inventory that wall would be there, which obviously would slow me down greatly because, I mean, I can't drive through it. And so now the new issue is who's going to destroy that blight wall, and pretty much the only reasonable answer was Ember, because of the fact that I was already waiting in my inventory for several seconds anyways. So very clearly the only person that even made sense was Ember to destroy it. So what we were doing was Ember would drive through the door, get off, turn around and snipe it, then get back on and go to his out of bounds spot to the wizard and move on with his run. And I thought this would only lose him roughly like a second and a half, because you literally just jump off your sparrow, snipe it, and get back on. But just the way you like stop your momentum to get off and you have to speed back up when you get on, it's actually more of like a 3-second time loss. And I didn't really realize that going into the runs early on in the week. But at this point, this is still before the ordeal week even started, and at this point the math still showed that the 201 should still be possible. And at this point, once again, I think the strategy is finalized, and I am just ready to go when the ordeal drops on Tuesday. And on Monday night, the day right before we could actually start doing runs, I was like, let's just get on and walk through the strategy one time with all 3 players to make sure it all works and we're all good to go the second Tuesday hits. So we do the entire strategy, not on an insanely good pace, we're just kind of messing around and making sure everything works. And a final issue pops up that really threw a curveball into the entire thing. And that is that there's a hidden CP that you have to hit to complete the strike, which is right after the knight, after that little zigzag Z-shaped hallway. And it's right where the thralls spawn in. If you ever do GMs, when you go around that corner where the first 3 thrall are, that's exactly where the CP is. And the CP doesn't even spawn in any ads or anything like that. It's just a random hidden CP that needs to be hit before you can complete the strike. And my first idea of trying to solve it was just the same way as the wizard and knight CPs, by trying to figure out a way to hit it from out of bounds. And what we determined was that it just physically isn't possible to hit from out of bounds, and some player at some point in time will have to walk through that. So the way I ended up solving this issue was, after Ember hit the wizard CP from out of bounds, he would go back up to where I drop into the wizard area and then go backwards to that spot. And this seems like a lot of backtracking, but hitting the wizard CP from out of bounds is way quicker than doing it from inbounds. So that's why he still hit it from out of bounds first, then went back pretty much to the same spot inbounds to hit the second CP. And he could easily do this before I got to the boss room, so it definitely was an issue. It was just a lot of random backtracking for a hidden CP that I didn't even know existed. This also made it so Alex was back to killing the knight, which means he would have to swap to Xenophage, 1k, Whisper, something like that, and make his route a lot harder again. So at this point we are officially ready to do runs on Tuesday when Ordeal comes out. And the run should still be a 2:01 pace. Exact pace of the sum of best segments was a 2:01.5. And just recapping what the strategy is at this point, because I know I've said a lot of stuff along the way. One person goes through the arc guide door right away, goes through the second door, turns around and shoots it, then goes to out of bounds, then spawns in the wizard from out of bounds in that one spot, and goes back up to the area where he can drop back into bounds by the wizard, then goes backwards to that second hidden CP. Then the second player is dropping Anarchy and Mountaintop on the third blight before it's even there, then drives through the door, and hopefully Alex joins in right after I get past the door. That way the blight spawns in and I can start doing damage to it. That way I can swap sooner. That way I can do the rest of my run, but I can't physically swap until that blight is dead, which is something I pretty much have to randomly guess at. Then after that I go out of bounds, drop to the wizard. By the time I get to the wizard, hopefully it's already there, kill the wizard and progress to the boss. And hopefully everything is done by the time I get into the boss room. The third player is joining in. The second he joins in, he kills the first and second blight, kills the arc guy, goes through and plays the strike as normal up to the captain, goes around the corner, triggers the knight CP, then has to wait roughly 4 seconds to kill the knight. And I was having him swap to Xenophage at the time, which is what he actually did in the final run too, and kill the knight. And pretty much if the pace was perfect, the second he killed the knight, I would already be in the boss room pretty much at the exact same time. So Tuesday comes around and we start doing runs. On Tuesday, I didn't have much time, but we started doing whatever we could with the few hours we had. And right off the bat, there were all kinds of issues. At best, I was roughly 2 or 3 seconds off my pace, which was a sum of Alex not having perfect loads, which was nearly impossible to perfectly time every single run. So there were some runs where he would be too early, which meant we didn't make it through the door. There'd be some runs where he's too late, which means we're waiting forever for the blight to spawn in, which means I have to swap later, which means I lose time. So either way, I was either losing time or we just had to reset. And even on perfect pace runs, I was still roughly 2 seconds off my predicted pace, which meant we're pretty much just losing 2 seconds right off the rip. And the second issue was when we weren't just resetting runs for an hour straight and actually got into the strike, the wizard was pretty much never there when I got there, which meant I had to wait a second or two for it to spawn in. And at the time I was very confused why that was. And overall, looking at the times that we were doing, pretty much we could only realistically get maybe a 206, and we were getting a bunch of 207s while doing this. So the main issue was, one, the wizard wasn't there, which in theory shouldn't be happening. And also just with the amount of human error, load time and stuff like that, getting the pace that I had in theory was pretty hard, because for a run to be perfect, we had to drive perfectly to the third blight. I had to place my Anarchy Mountaintop there. Then Alex had to spawn in pretty much exactly the frame I got through the door. That way the blight would spawn in and it would start taking damage. Then I would have to swap to Black Talon and pretty much just pray that the Anarchy actually killed the blight for it to be a perfect pace run. So in reality, with all those different loadings adding up, I was definitely pretty much a full 2 seconds off pace, which meant maybe a 203 was still possible. But then on top of that, like I said, the wizard wasn't even there and I was waiting a few extra seconds on the wizard. One thing we found out pretty early on is that the door that we were passing through by the arc guy, you could actually shoot it for roughly half a second when it first loaded in. The blight that you shoot to destroy the door was there for whatever reason for a split second before it went away, which meant you could actually break the door before doing any of the blights or killing the arc guy. which made the timing of Alex's load a little bit easier to do because of the fact that we didn't need him to load pretty much the frame after I made it through the door. All we needed him to do was load in as Ember was getting off his Sparrow to shoot the door, and that made it like roughly a 1 second window of where it would be a pretty good pace, which made it a lot more realistic to get good pace runs in. And overall, this didn't really change much about the predicted time. I was still on the same pace I should have been. It was just a lot easier to do it, and once again Ember was pretty much on the same pace also. The one thing that it did help was give Alex a little bit more time, which pretty much gave him 1 more second to do what he had to do before I got to the boss room. But this didn't really change the fact that the wizard wasn't there, and that pretty much boiled down to the fact that Ember just simply had to be quicker, and him getting off to shoot the blight for me was just taking way too long and making it so he couldn't physically spawn in the wizard CP quick enough for me. And pretty much the only way to fix that was he just simply doesn't shoot that wall for me, which makes him roughly 3 seconds quicker. But at the same time, if I have to destroy it, that makes me lose like 3 seconds. So what is the fix here? It's definitely not obvious at all. And at this point, it's like Thursday night, and I'm just like, this strategy just isn't adding up to what we thought it could be. And I woke up Friday morning thinking about a really crazy strat that I thought might be able to fix the issue, but I wasn't quite sure if it was even possible or realistic to actually do. And that was throwing Black Talon at the third blight before it even spawned in. That way, by the time the Black Talon got there, it would already be in the radius of that dome that spawns around the blight and hit it. And yeah, if you think that sounds crazy, that's probably because it is. And what this allowed was that I didn't have to swap anymore, which meant I could throw the Black Talon at the blight, then go towards the actual strike area, and the door would already be broken by Ember because he was shooting it like I mentioned. And now the second door that Ember was shooting previously also, he could now pass it up and go straight to the wizard right away, which made him like 3 seconds quicker. And now with this strategy, I'm no longer waiting in my inventory to swap once the blight is dead, which now means I can afford to lose the time and shoot the second door myself and pretty much be on the same pace I was if I was swapping off my Anarchy. So what this did was make me be on the same pace I already was, but now Ember is a little bit quicker, which means the wizard should be there for me. And this pretty much solves all of our issues. I'm still on the same pace I thought I could be going into the week, but now Ember's on the pace he needs to be on, that way the wizard is there when I get there. Then overall, Alex has maybe 1 more second of time than I thought going into the week. So overall, this strategy not only is back on pace with what I thought we could do going into the week, but it's actually a little bit more wiggle room. So now at this point, with the strategy actually fully working and potentially resulting in a time I thought we could get going into the week, which is at 2:01, it is now already the weekend, Saturday, and we just have pretty much 3 days left to actually try to get a run in. And as you can imagine, there really isn't much about this run that is easy, which leads me to talking about the best possible time and the remaining issues with the strategy. So like I mentioned multiple times, the best possible time in theory is 2:01. I think the strategy could potentially result in a 2:00, like 0.8, 0.9, but more than likely, realistically, it's gonna be a 2:01. But the thing about this run is it's so freaking hard to actually do this run, and that is because the load time of Alex joining is pretty random. And when I say random, I mean like even if it's plus or minus a second, that already makes it extremely hard to pull off. Because of the fact that if you want a 2:01, he has to load at the exact right time, and that also means you have to drive perfectly to get to that spot. That way you're ready when he loads perfectly. Obviously, if it wasn't match made, you would just load in with the 2 people and tell them to join when you needed to. But because of the fact that if you load in with just the 2 players, you would get a third because of matchmaking. Obviously, we had to start off with all 3, then have them leave, then rejoin. So overall, when you're trying to do runs, the 2 players that are playing the strike the entire way have to drive perfectly pretty much every run as if it is the run, but like 40% of the runs a blueberry might join. The next 50% of the runs, the timing will be either way too quick or way too slow. And when I say way, I mean like a second or 2 off. And if he's a second or 2 early, that means it's a reset. Because Ember's not at the door yet, I'm not in position to throw my Black Talon, which means obviously we can't do the run. Then if he is on the later side by like a second or 2, that means we're there waiting, which means we just lose a second or 2. So actually getting a pretty perfect pace run might only happen like once an hour. And when you do finally get that perfect pace run, you've literally been resetting in orbit and haven't even seen the inside part of the strike. So when you actually do get a run that you can actually proceed with, none of us have even done our job in an hour. And the third player that is joining constantly hasn't even touched their keyboard in that hour. So once you're actually on that good pace, I mean, you're so cold with the entire strat, you just have to pop off and do it with like no practice in maybe an hour. And not only that, the wizard spawn is pretty touchy and random. There were so many good pace runs where the wizard just wasn't quite there yet, which is one of the issues I'm going to try to solve when we go back to do it again. And that just simply boils down to that player has to hit that CP quicker. And as you saw in this run, which we did like on Sunday, I believe, Ember was destroying his Sparrow once he got out of bounds. That way it wouldn't be in my way when I got there, which was slowing him down by roughly like a second. So by Monday, which was the last day, I told him to stop doing that. That way the wizard would be more likely to be there when I got there. And that definitely helped with that. But there were still a lot of runs where just the wizard simply wasn't there and I had to wait a few seconds, just like the 204 run that we uploaded. So in that one run an hour that we get that is pretty good pace, we have to get lucky and have the wizard already there. Then the door after the wizard has to come down right away, which definitely isn't consistent at all. So we probably lost a good 50% of our runs, probably even more up to that point, to the door just simply taking way too long to break. Then runs that were on good pace past that point, where it was a pretty good Alex load. I got to wizard on good pace, wizard was already there, then the door came down pretty quickly, or before I even got to it. Most of the runs that got past that point died to the knight not dying in time, because Alex's job is incredibly tight, and the quicker I do my job means the quicker he has to do his job, and his job doesn't really have much time to save. And that is the huge issue of this run. You only get good pace runs in like once an hour. Then when you do, pretty much everything has to line up perfectly. And what I mean by that is, let's say 2 of the 3 players do their job perfect and the third player does their job really well, but not quite perfect. It just doesn't matter. It has to all line up. To get a perfect run, all 3 players have to be perfect. If 2 are perfect, one's not, it doesn't work. And the same goes for like good pace runs. If 2 players are on really good pace and 1 player's on decent pace, once again, it doesn't work. All 3 players have to be doing their stuff at the same speed for it to line up and actually work, which is why it's hard to get like a half decent run. And even though the strategy could result in a 201 or potentially 200, that's why it's hard to get like a 202 or 203, because if it's slightly off, it just doesn't work. So it's almost like you either get a 201 or you get a 205, and there's pretty much no in between. So that's the 2 things I would definitely want to try to fix going into our next session, is just getting the wizard CP to spawn more consistently, and also maybe try to figure out how to kill the knight a little bit quicker. That way, if we are on perfect pace, the knight should be dead in time, because a lot of our runs that were like 201 pace, I would get to the boss room and I'm just sitting there waiting to hear knight's dead, knight's dead, knight's dead, and I'm getting closer and closer to the boss room, and if the knight doesn't die in time, I get wiped when I touch it, right? And our best run was probably gonna be a 201, but I was waiting, just waiting to hear knight's dead. And at this point, I was pretty close to the top of the hallway when I finally heard knight's dead. And at this point, I'm trying to like zigzag slightly to scrub some time off my run to slow myself down. And I heard knight's dead and I was pretty much at the top already. And I waited maybe like half a second and jumped in, and I still died. And even with me kind of like zigzagging a bit, it still would have been a 202. And that was definitely our best run. I think that was on Saturday maybe. And looking back, obviously I wish I waited a little bit longer and still maybe got like a high 202, maybe a low 203. Best run of the week that was completely on the 201 pace the entire way, but the knight simply just died a split second too slow. So yeah, this run, there's a lot of stuff that has to go perfect. And on top of that, the fact that you can't do runs that often, and when you do get runs in, you haven't even done the run in like an hour, just makes it really hard to freaking get a 201. Anyways, moving on to some random stuff I found along the way that wasn't really useful at all and never made its way into any of the different strategies along the way. And the first one is probably the craziest. there is this out of bounds by the third blight, and I'm recording this audio well before I record the gameplay, so it might not match up perfectly with what I'm saying. But pretty much you go to this third blight in this little corner, and you put your sparrow up against the wall, and you hold left and get off. If you do it at the right spot, it pushes you under the ground, and now you're under the map. And pretty much what you can do is, if you have super on top true Dawnblade, you can fly over, and I should really say under, to past where the arc guy spawns, then up, back up into like where the hallway is when you enter the actual strike, and you can get out of bounds in that area. And this strategy potentially could have worked if you could then proceed to where I go back inbounds by the wizard, but the only way to get to that area is hit the reservoir CP, which there is no way to do that from this area. You have to go back into the hallway and hit the CP as if you were playing normally, which pretty much it goes against the entire point of even doing the out of bounds in the first place. If you just have to go back in bounds where like you normally would, it just didn't really make a lot of sense. Plus you needed your super, so overall that quickly was scratched off the list. The second craziest was you can get into the boss room from the bridge area, and you can do that by either blinking in or just straight up climbing up with something like Arc Staff or Top Tier Dawnblade once again. But the thing about this is you can only go into this room when everything in the strike is done. Just like in the actual strategy, if I go into the boss room too early, I die. The same thing happens. You can only go into this area once everything's done. So pretty much just right there, that already tells you it's pretty much pointless, because you can't physically go into the boss room until you would normally, which means what's kind of the point of it? Then to make it even worse, there's yet another hidden CP. If you do everything in the strike to load in the boss room, then if you blink up into that area and destroy the blight, the boss doesn't even spawn in, because there's another hidden CP right at the entrance, which I'm going to be showing off at some point in time during this little segment. And until you touch that, the boss can't physically spawn in anyways. So yeah, this was pretty much useless the second we found that, and didn't even look into it ever again. Another one that was actually really close to making it into one of the versions of the strategy was either killing the captain or the knight from out of bounds. And you can do this by using something that has a area of effect damage, so AoE like nades, even someone like Anarchy, or even 1k. And there's a few spots where you can kind of like lure the knight or captain and hit them from under the floor. And once again, I'll be showing this off on screen at some point in here. And you could kill either the knight or the captain. And we were trying to figure out how that could be useful in some way, and it just never worked. And finally, the last thing that I found that was completely useless was originally when I was on like the 156 pace to the boss room, but all the other stuff wasn't done yet. I was like, maybe I can destroy the boss blight before I even enter the room. That way, the second everything else was done, I could enter the room and the boss would spawn instantly. And once again, just like I was killing the knight and captain, I was trying to use a bunch of AoE type of things and figure out how to kill the blight before even getting close to it. And the only way I figured out to even damage the blight was with something like solar grenades. And let me tell you, it takes like 50 solar grenades to destroy a blight. So you can do this, and you could pre-kill the blight before even entering the boss CP. And the second you enter the room, the boss would spawn, which potentially sounds like a good time save, but the way you kill a blight takes, 20 minutes. So yeah, once again, cross that off very quickly. It was definitely something I wanted to see in theory what even happened if you destroyed the blight early. I was like, does the boss just spawn in instantly? But no, the boss does not spawn in until everything in the strike is done, which, makes sense. And yeah, that was pretty much the last random thing I found along the way. I'm sure there's probably some small things I missed. But yeah, overall, that is how Lake of Shadows became the fastest strike in the history of Destiny. And potentially, at some point, might become sub 2. As of right now, I don't think you're going to break the 200 mark. I think if you do get 200, it'll be really damn impressive. But I just don't think sub 2 is possible. Anyways, let me know what you think about this type of video. I know a lot of people enjoyed the last one, and this one was much longer. I think my recording on my voice is at almost 60 minutes right now. So yeah, I can't wait to edit this video. I'm sure it's gonna be pretty long. But thanks for watching. Catch you guys next time.
Ed.
The taken compromise.
Let it burn. Do I got a back record?
Yeah.